The success of a project is measured by its ability to meet its objectives, and one of the key objectives of every project is for it to be able to meet its budget. That makes cost management a very important concept in project management. The cost management could consist of several processes, and the key ones have to do with estimating, budgeting, and controlling the costs in order to complete the project within the approved budget. Cost management is primarily concerned with the cost of the resources that will be used on the project. But it is important that we should always consider the effect of decisions regarding cost on the subsequent costs of maintaining or operating the product of our project. For instance, if we decide to use cheap materials to create a certain product, it might increase the cost of maintenance later on if the product has been turned over to operations. As with many processes, the first step in having an effective cost management is to perform cost management planning, and this is the beginning of our cost management on our project. And this planning effort should be done together with the team that is executing this project. The result of this planning effort is a cost management plan, and this cost management plan will set out the format and the criteria that will be adopted in planning, structuring, estimating, budgeting, and controlling project costs. In details, the cost management plan will also establish a level of accuracy. For instance, if our cost elements will be rounded off to two decimal places, then we could also talk of the units of measure that we'll adopt on our project, maybe US dollars or the Ghana cedi. Then we'll talk of control thresholds, how much is enough, how much is too much. Then we will determine what performance measurement techniques that we will be applying on our project. We could talk of techniques like end value management, for instance, to control costs on our projects. Then we will also state the reporting formats and the various cost management processes that we will be adopting on our project. The cost management plan could be a detailed formal document or an informal document based on the needs of our project. The next thing to do after creating our cost management plan will be to come up with a project scope description. And the scope of a project is simply what the project entails. And the scope definition helps in project execution to identify what is and what is not part of our project. Some useful documents that would help us define the scope of our project or inputs to our process of scope definition would include the project charter. And this charter is a document that formally authorizes the project, and it contains the high-level project and product requirements. Then we could also have a document known as a requirements documentation, and it lists all the requirements of the project as identified by its stakeholders. And the stakeholders here are all the people who have an amount of interest in the project. Then we could refer to organizational process assets, which are policies, procedures, templates, and all project documents that we could get from our archives as historical records from previous projects. All these are classified as organizational process assets. Useful tools and techniques that we could employ as a means of arriving at our outcome, which is a good scope statement for our project, would include techniques like expert judgment, where we will consult experts or people who have specialized knowledge in coming up with a project scope. Then we could employ a product analysis, that is analyzing the objectives and description of our products as has been given to us by the customer in order to turn them into deliverables. Then we could rely on alternatives identification, which involves identifying different ways of performing the work of the project. Then we could hold facilitated workshops so that we could get opinions from various stakeholder quarters. Our output or the outcome of our scope definition will be a project scope statement, and this is the main result we want to achieve in this process. And as we said earlier, the scope statement will describe in detail all the work required in order to accomplish the project objectives. After coming up with our scope statement, the next thing we would like to do is to create a work breakdown structure. And this is the process of subdividing the project work into smaller and more manageable components. The WBS, which is short for the work breakdown structure, is a hierarchical decomposition of the work to be done. It will organize and define the total scope of the project, and it breaks down the total scope into lower levels, and these lowest levels of WBS are referred to as work packages. And a work package can easily be scheduled, it can be cost estimated, it can be monitored and controlled throughout the life of the project. And these work packages are later divided into individual activities for the project team to execute. If a piece of work is not identified in the WBS, what it means is that that piece of work is not part of the project, because the WBS breaks down the total scope of the project. Some inputs that we could make reference to help us come up with a good WBS would include the project scope statement, which is the key input here, because it is a scope statement that describes in detail the work required in order to accomplish the project objectives. Then we could refer again to the requirements documentation mentioned earlier, and we could also depend on historical records and other organizational process assets, which could include templates for the WBS, which could include project files from previous projects. We could also have policies, procedures developed already by the organization in question for use on projects. All these are useful inputs that we could make reference to when creating a WBS or a work breakdown structure. And the technique we are employing here is decomposition. that is a subdivision of project deliverables into smaller, more manageable components until the lowest level or the work package level is reached. And we say that the work package level is the smallest level which could be estimated in terms of time and schedule, which could be monitored and controlled, and for which beyond that the only thing we could get will be individual activities. As our output, we will be coming up with a WBS, which again is a hierarchical decomposition of the work to be done by the project team. So we start with the scope statement, and then we break it down until we reach the lowest levels of the work package level. So it's in the form of a hierarchy. Then in addition to the WBS, we could come up with a WBS dictionary, and this is a document that provides more detailed descriptions of each of the various components in the WBS. And when we put together our scope statement, our WBS, and a WBS dictionary, we get what we call a scope baseline for our project, and this is the total scope of the project against which any scope decisions could be made. Now we have our WBS. The WBS will give us work packages which are still, even though small, relatively they will consist of many individual activities. So the next thing to do will be to break down each WBS work package into individual activities that will be easy for a project team to execute. So the process of defining activities is talking about identifying and listing the tasks that need to be performed to produce the project deliverables. And it is achieved by decomposing the work packages identified during the Create WBS process into smaller pieces of work. Useful inputs that we could make reference to will be, of course, the WBS, and this we mentioned together with the dictionary and the scope statement will form the scope baseline. And then the organization could have assets such as policies, procedures, and guidelines, and historical information, lessons learned from previous projects could be useful inputs to defining activities. And the techniques we could make use of, again, decomposition, which is subdividing the work packages into smaller, more manageable components called activities. And we could also depend on rolling wave planning, which is a form of progressive elaboration where the work to be accomplished is planned in detail as and when there is enough information. Then we could depend on experts, people who have specialized knowledge in creating activity lists out of work packages. Could be useful. Now, expert judgment, the expert judgment could come from the project manager himself, it could come from the team, or it could come from people who are outside the project. The outcomes or outputs of the defined activities process will be the activity list, which will be a comprehensive list of all the activities planned to be performed on the project. Then it will be good to have an activity attributes list, which tend to give more detail about each listed activity. It might relate things like activity ID in reference to the work package from which it is coming. So it will relate to the WBS ID, Then we could have a short description of the activity, the resource requirements, the constraints, and assumptions surrounding that activity. We could also come up with a milestone list. And a milestone is defined as a significant point or event in the project. For instance, the end of a project phase could be a milestone. The end of a key activity could be a milestone. So a milestone list is a list of all the identified milestones pertaining to the project. After we've come up with all our activities that our project will entail, we go to sequence these activities. And this is the process of establishing a logical relationship among the project activities. It results in knowing predecessors, that is, activities that need to be done before a particular activity, and successors, and those activities that need to be done after a particular activity. And our requirements for this process will be our activity list together with the attributes and the milestone list, because it's the activity list that will give us the individual activities that we are going to sequence in a logical form, taking note of predecessors and successors. Then we could also make references to the project scope statement, which will be able to give us more detail about the product, and the characteristics of the product might help us to know how to sequence activities when executing the project. Then once again, organizational process assets are always useful in terms of references when sequencing activities. Tools and techniques we could employ to sequence activities. We have PDM, which is precedence diagramming methods, also known as activity on node, and this is a method where we use boxes or rectangles to represent activities, and we connect them with arrows or lines that show the logical relationship that exists between those activities. So we could have a rectangle with A representing an activity, then another rectangle with B, then we connect them with arrows showing which one comes after which one. And PDM could make use of four types of dependencies or logical relationships between activities. It means an activity will finish, then another starts, as in a finish to start relationship, FS. We could have an activity finishing after another activity is finished, which is FF. We could have a start to start relationship, SS, in which an activity starts only after the previous one starts. Then we could also have a start to finish relationship, where an activity will only finish after another activity has started. Then we will make use of dependency determination, where given two activities, which should we do after which, and we could consider factors such as mandatory dependencies or hard logic, where there are some dependencies which are fixed due to the nature of work. For instance, when you are building a house, you could only build a wall after building the foundation. So it is mandatory. It is fixed due to the nature of the work. Now there are discretionary dependencies or preferred or soft logic, and these are established based on knowledge of best practices, and it's not because that's the only way of sequencing activities. For instance, fixing light bulbs, fixing ceiling fans, any could be done before the other. It is discretionary. Then there are external dependencies which come from outside the project. It could come from the customer about the way things should be done. Those are external dependencies. In sequencing activities also, we could take into consideration the ability to apply leads and lags. Applying leads here will mean that starting an activity earlier than planned. Now applying a lag will mean delaying an activity. Then we could make use of network templates, already created templates which will serve as tools for us to customize for use on our current project. Our outputs will be a project schedule network diagram, which is a schematic display of the logical relationships among the project activities. Then it will be useful to update any related project documents that we have as a result of any new information that has come up as a result of our sequencing of activities. Now that we've sequenced our activities, it will be good if we could estimate the resource needs of each activity. So we want to determine the type and the quantities of resources required for the activities listed in the previous processes. When we talk of resources, we refer to material, people, and equipment that are required to perform each activity. We could make reference to our activity list and its attributes because that is what we want to estimate resources for. Then we could make reference to the resource calendar of the organization, and this resource calendar will show us when resources will be available and also their capabilities. Resources are not available all the time. Resources could be working on other projects, resources could be working with other teams, resources could be on vacation. So referring to the resource calendar will help us to know when resources will be available so that we can assign them to our activities. We could also consider the existing systems in organization, which is sometimes referred to as the enterprise environmental factors. The resource availability and the skills. We can only work with what we have. So what is available and their skill level is what we can use for our project. Then our organizational process assets, which could include policies, procedures regarding staffing, for instance, policies and procedures for acquisition of equipment, historical information regarding resources used on previous projects. All these could be useful inputs when determining the resource needs of the activities on our project. The tools and techniques that we could depend on, again, expert judgment, and in addition we could determine alternative ways of doing the same work, that's alternative analysis. We could rely on published estimating data either from the organization or from external sources. Then we could apply bottom-up estimating procedures where a piece of work is decomposed into smaller tasks and resource needs are estimated for these small tasks, and then these resource needs are then aggregated into a total quantity for the activity. So it means if the activity is quite big, we could further break it down to sub-activities and estimate resources in terms of people, in terms of material, in terms of equipment. Then we could aggregate these estimates to arrive at the total estimate for the activity in question. Then we could also use a project management software if it's available to help us with our estimation process. The outputs that we'll come up with will include an activity resource requirements list. So we'll determine the resource requirements for each activity, and out of these requirements we could form a resource breakdown structure, an RBS, which will show hierarchical structure of the identified resources grouped by resource category and resource type. So we could group the resources according to categories and according to type, and then we could update our project documents. And we should see project document updates as a good practice on every project. It's a way of contributing to our organizational process assets ourselves. So always we could make updates to even the lessons learned, knowledge base. Could make updates to the project documents we have now so that they will serve as historical information for future projects. The next thing to do will be to estimate the durations for each activity, and this is a process of getting an approximate duration each activity will take by careful analysis of the work and the resources available. We will need our activity list, activity requirements, resource calendars, our project scope statement, enterprise environmental factors such as published commercial information, then some historical information, and lessons learned, altogether referred to as organizational process assets. All these could be inputs or references that could be useful in estimating activity durations. For our tools and techniques, expert judgment will always be key. Whenever there is a deficiency in our knowledge, we will always depend on experts to help us with whatever information we will need. Then, because we are estimating, we will be using a lot of estimating techniques here. We will have analogous estimating could be used. And analogous estimating will be using duration estimates from historical projects which were similar as a basis to estimate the current project. Then we could depend on parametric estimating, which uses mathematical formulae to establish relationship between historical data and other variables. So parametric estimating will use information as in the analogous, but it tries to bring it to the now, which means it's able to give a more accurate estimate than the analogous by applying a little bit of mathematical relations to calculate what the case will be now in relation to what it was with the previous project. We could depend on 3-point estimates, which are referred to as PET estimates. PET stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique, and it introduces the concept of risk and uncertainty in our estimates. So instead of just using a 1-point estimate as in saying this activity will take 2 days. PET says we should use 3 different estimates to arrive at an expected estimate. Then we could also depend on a technique of reserve analysis, where we know that there will be uncertainties, so it will be necessary to have time reserves or buffers to serve as contingency. When we do estimate activity durations, we come up with activity duration estimates and updates to any related project documents. After we've estimated durations, the next thing to do is to estimate costs. And in estimating costs, we try to identify and determine approximate amount of money needed to complete each activity. And usually when the project starts from the beginning, we don't have sufficient information, so the accuracy of our estimates will increase as the project progresses, where more and more information becomes available. A cost on a project can either be variable or fixed, direct or indirect, which means there are some costs which change with the amount of work being done, the other costs which remain the same. There are costs which could be directly attributed to the work we are doing. There are other costs which are overhead items which are not directly attributed to the project work. Variable costs are those which change with the amount of work being performed, and fixed costs do not change with the work being done. Direct costs are directly attributable to the work on the project, and indirect costs are costs that are incurred for the benefit of more than one particular project. We'll be making reference to our scope baseline, our project schedule. In this case, the schedule will be useful in that the amount of time resources will spend on the project will determine the cost. Then we will need a human resource plan which tells us how much personnel are paid, for instance, personnel rates, the rewards and recognitions, the risk register, how much are we spending to manage risk on our project. Enterprise environmental factors such as what are the existing systems around us, the marketplace conditions regarding products, services available in the market, how much are people being paid on the market, how much are activities being done in this industry, publish commercial information regarding human material and equipment costs are all part of enterprise environmental factors which we could rely on, depend on, make reference to when estimating costs on our activities. Then we'll make reference to organizational process assets such as cost estimating policies, templates, historical information, and lessons that have been learned from previous projects. And just like in estimating durations, we could make use of the same estimating techniques like expert judgment, analogous estimating, parametric estimating, bottom-up estimating, 3-point estimates, reserve analysis. Then when it comes to cost, we should think of the cost of quality also. In meeting the quality standards for our project, we need to pay for it. So we will be adding the cost of meeting quality to our estimates. We could make use of estimating software if available. Then cost quotations by vendors in the case where our project will involve some amount of procurements. Then vendor bid analysis will also play a role here as a technique that we could use to arrive at the estimates for our work. Our outcome of estimating costs will be activity cost estimates. We'll find estimates for each of the activities that have been identified. Then it will be good to come up with the basis of estimates, how the cost estimate was derived. Then it will be good to update our risk register, for instance, with the cost estimates of various risk responses and any other related project document that needs to be updated as a result of this process. The next thing to do will be to develop our schedule. This is a process of creating a calendar-based project schedule by using the activity sequences, the duration estimates, and the resource estimates that have been determined earlier. So as we said, it will be depending on our activity list, the attributes, our schedule network diagrams that we used to sequence the activities, the resource requirements, resource calendars, which will tell us when resources will be available, the duration estimates for each activity, the scope statement, which would contain some assumptions and constraints, the enterprise environmental factors, existing company scheduling tool, for instance, procedures for scaling organizational process assets. Techniques, we could make use of schedule network analysis techniques such as the critical path method, critical chain method, resource leveling, what if scenarios, blind leads and lags, schedule compression. All these techniques could be used in developing our project schedule. And we could also depend on automated scheduling tools to generate start and finish dates based on data that is input into the system. So our output will be the project schedule. In the schedule will always show us the plan start and the plan finish date for each activity. And we could represent the project schedule in the form of milestone charts, in the form of bar charts, in the form of a schedule network diagram. Whenever our project schedule has been approved by the key stakeholders, it becomes our schedule baseline, and this will be used to measure schedule performance on the project. Our schedule data, updated milestone lists, for instance, assumptions and constraints, are also outputs of this process. And then there will be updates to other project documents, which might include also the risk register. Now we have our project schedule. The next thing to do will be to determine the project budget. And this will do by aggregating the estimated cost of the individual activities or work packages, in case that the work package has not been broken down further into activities, so that we can establish a cost baseline. Then we'll not forget that there are uncertainties, so contingency reserves will be added to address the cost impacts of risks that have been identified. Then for our project, we should always have a certain reserve predetermined by management, for instance, to be either 2% or 5% of the budget for our project. And this reserve is known as a management reserve. And there are extra funds that we need to set aside to cover unforeseen risks, things that we never thought could happen, and yet they happen, and they affect our project negatively. We should have funds, extra funds set aside to cater for such unforeseen occurrences. So the cost baseline of our project will include the contingency reserves, and this will represent the funds that have been authorized for the project manager to manage. And to the project manager, this is the budget that has been approved for the project. Now the cost budget is the cost baseline plus the management reserve, and this management reserve is under the control of senior management or the sponsor, which means it's not the money approved for the project manager to use. The amount approved for the project manager to use on the project is a cost baseline. What documents do we need to make reference to here in determining the budget? Our activity cost estimates, the key input, with the basis of estimates and the scope baseline. Then the project schedule, resource calendars, contracts. If some of the work is being done under contract, we need to consider that in coming up with the budget. Then we'll make reference to organizational process assets, for instance, budgeting related policies, procedures, and guidelines. What techniques could we use here? Will be depending on cost aggregation, summing up costs from the activity levels into work package costs. We sum up work package costs, we will arrive at control account costs. We sum up control account costs, we will arrive at the final budget. Then we will have to do analysis of the contingency and management reserves also. Know how much is allocated for contingency, for instance, because we'll be adding it up to the budget to arrive at the cost baseline. We could consult experts to help in areas we are not very comfortable in. We'll look at historical relationships, historical data on past projects. Help us to determine the budget of our current project, for instance. Then we will need to do a good work on reconciliation, the funding limit, managing our expenditures to fall within the funding limits of the project. Our outcomes or outputs will be a cost baseline or a cost performance baseline, which is the authorized budget used to measure, monitor, and control the cost performance on the project. Then we'll come up with our project funding requirements, which details the total and periodic funding requirements derived from the cost baseline. Then we could update any related project document with information that has come up as a result of our budget determination. Now we have a budget and the project work is ongoing. We will need to control the costs, and this is the process of monitoring and managing the changes to the cost baseline. We want to make sure all expenditure falls within the cost baseline, and it also ensures that the cost expenditure does not exceed the authorized funding, and to monitor the work performance against the funds that are expended. As inputs, we make a reference to our project management plan, which in fact will contain our cost management plan and the cost baseline. We make reference to our project funding requirements, the total and periodic funding requirements. We'll make reference to what we are doing so far, the work performance information, the progress of work, how much has been spent, cost-related policies, procedures, and guidelines will be useful here as part of our organizational process assets. Tools and techniques we could depend on in controlling costs and value management. A very important technique that could be used to monitor cost performance on our project. Then based on the measurements, we could draw forecasts to know whether our project will fall within budget or will run over budget. Frequent performance reviews should be done. We'll compare cost performance over time, schedule activities running over and under budget, estimated funds needed to complete work in progress. It will be good to use the technique of variance analysis, finding out the difference in what was planned and what is going on in actual, so that we'll do the necessary changes. Then we could depend on project management software, if there is one, so that we can monitor performance, display graphical trends, and forecast a range of possible final project results. As outputs of this process, we will have our work performance measurements, which are the calculated values from end value management. Then we could arrive at forecasts, calculated values of estimate at completion. We could update our organizational process assets, for instance, the lessons learned database with new information. Then we could raise change requests if need be to bring our cost performance back to plan. Then we could update our cost management plan, which is part of our project management plan, with any new changes that have been approved and agreed on. Then we could update any other project documents such as cost estimates and the basis of estimates.